"Don't, someone might see." But the rancher did it anyway, and the whole town lost their minds. Everyone knew each other's names, habits, and family history. Secrets rarely survived here. If something happened, even something small, it traveled faster than the wind across the plains. On the far edge of town lived a rancher named Thomas Hale. He was in his early 40s, tall, broad-shouldered, and weathered by years of hard work under the sun. His ranch had been in his family for generations. Thomas was known as a man of routine. He woke before dawn, worked until the sky turned orange, and rarely spoke more than necessary. People respected him, though few felt close to him. He kept to himself not out of pride, but because life had taught him that silence was safer than words. Thomas had lost his parents young and never married. The ranch became his whole world. Every fence post, every animal, every patch of land carried a memory. The town often described him as steady and reliable. If something broke, Thomas fixed it. If help was needed during a storm, Thomas showed up. Still, no one truly knew what went on behind the gates of his property. That late afternoon began like any other. The sun hung low, painting the fields gold. Thomas was repairing an old barn door when he noticed a figure standing near the dirt road, just beyond his fence. It was a woman from town named Emily Carter. She was younger than him by several years, known for her quiet nature and thoughtful eyes. She rarely came near the ranch, which made her presence unusual. Emily looked nervous. She kept glancing over her shoulder as if expecting someone to appear at any moment. When Thomas approached the fence, she hesitated, then spoke softly. Her voice trembled as she asked if they could talk somewhere more private. Thomas frowned, instantly aware that in this town, even standing too close could start stories. He looked toward the road. It was empty for now, but that meant nothing. Someone could pass by at any moment. He suggested they move inside the barn, where at least the walls would hide them from view. Emily nodded quickly, relief flashing across her face. Inside the barn, dust floated through the air, glowing in the fading sunlight. The space smelled of hay and old wood. Emily paced for a moment, wringing her hands. Thomas waited, patient as always. Finally, she spoke. She explained that she was in trouble, the kind that could ruin her life if people found out. Her words came out slowly, carefully, as if each one carried weight. As she talked, Thomas felt his chest tighten. What she shared was deeply personal, something that should never become town gossip. He listened without interrupting, his expression calm even though his thoughts raced. He understood immediately why she had come to him. He had a reputation for discretion. He didn't spread stories, he didn't judge. Emily's voice dropped to a whisper as she finished. Then she looked at him with fear in her eyes and said, "Please, don't let anyone see this, don't let anyone know." Thomas knew the risk. Even being alone with her could look wrong to the wrong person. Appearances mattered more than truth in a place like this. He could already imagine the looks, the whispers, the conclusions people would jump to without asking a single question. For a moment he considered stepping back. He could tell her to leave, to find help elsewhere. It would be safer for him, easier. But he also knew that turning her away would mean abandoning someone who trusted him when she had nowhere else to go. A sound from outside froze them both, the crunch of tires on gravel. Emily's eyes widened. She grabbed Thomas's arm without thinking and whispered urgently, "Don't, someone might see." Time seemed to slow. Thomas glanced toward the barn door. Through a narrow gap, he saw a pickup truck approaching along the road. If it passed by slowly, anyone inside could easily look over and notice the open barn, notice the two figures standing close together. Thomas had seconds to decide. Step away and let the moment look harmless, or act quickly to protect Emily's secret, even if it meant being misunderstood. He closed the barn door fully, shutting out the view from the road. The truck slowed. From the outside, it might have looked like something was being hidden. From the inside, it was simply a man choosing privacy over public opinion. Emily pressed her hand to her mouth, breathing shallowly. Thomas stood between her and the door, not touching her but shielding her from sight. The truck eventually drove on. Neither of them spoke for several seconds. The silence was heavy. Finally, Emily let out a shaky breath. Tears filled her eyes, not from fear alone, but from relief. She thanked Thomas again and again, her voice breaking. Thomas nodded, telling her calmly that everything would be handled carefully. They agreed she would leave first once it was safe, and that they would keep their distance in public. No long conversations, no obvious signs, just caution. Emily slipped out the back of the barn and disappeared across the fields. Thomas stayed behind, leaning against a wooden beam, staring at the floor. He knew deep down that despite his care, something about this moment would not stay hidden forever. Towns like this had a way of sensing change, of sniffing out anything unusual. That evening, as Thomas drove into town for supplies, he felt it before he saw it. Conversations paused when he walked past. A pair of women near the store entrance stopped talking mid-sentence. Someone glanced at him, then quickly looked away. It was subtle but unmistakable. Inside the store, the cashier, who usually greeted him warmly, only nodded this time. A man near the counter whispered something to another, both of them glancing toward Thomas. His stomach sank. He paid for his items and left without a word. By nightfall, Thomas sat alone on his porch, listening to the distant sounds of crickets and wind through the grass. The stars filled the sky, bright and uncaring. He replayed the afternoon in his mind again and again. He knew he had done what he believed was right. Still, he also knew the town didn't care much for unseen reasons. It cared about what it thought it saw. Somewhere out there, someone had noticed something. Maybe it was the truck driver slowing down. Maybe it was someone passing later, seeing Emily's footprints near the fence. In this town, it didn't take much. A single look could turn into a story could turn into judgment, and judgment could change a life. As Thomas sat in the darkness, he had no idea how far the whispers would go or how loudly the town would react once the rumors took shape. He only knew that the choice he made in that barn in those few seconds would soon echo far beyond his quiet ranch. And this was only the beginning. The next morning, the town of Willow Creek felt different, though no one could say exactly why. People moved a little slower, spoke a little quieter, and glanced at each other with subtle curiosity. In small towns, even the smallest hint of unusual behavior spread quickly, like a spark in dry grass. By mid-morning, the story, or what people imagined the story to be, was already taking shape. At the local diner, a few women sat in a corner booth, whispering as they sipped coffee. "Did you see Thomas Hale yesterday?" one asked. Her voice was hushed, almost conspiratorial. "I heard he was with Emily Carter, right at the barn," the others gasped, covering their mouths as if the words themselves were dangerous. Every detail they added twisted the story further. The barn, the handshake, the hurried movements, all became pieces of a scandalous puzzle in their minds. Meanwhile, Thomas went about his day as if nothing had changed. He fed the cattle, checked the fences, and mended a section of the roof damaged by last week's storm. To him, the afternoon with Emily had been a private matter, one he had handled with care and respect. But in Willow Creek, private moments rarely stayed private. By noon, the whispers had reached the general store. The young clerk, usually cheerful and quick to chat, found himself awkwardly avoiding Thomas. A few townspeople lingered at the entrance, pretending to browse while actually watching him. Thomas noticed, of course, but he didn't react. Years of living alone had taught him that patience and silence often worked better than confrontation. The person who had most closely witnessed the unusual moment, the driver of the pickup truck, kept replaying it in his mind. He hadn't seen everything, only a glimpse through the barn door, but in a town like Willow Creek, even glimpses became stories. That evening he told his friend at the hardware store, and soon the tale morphed. The barn, once an ordinary structure, now became a stage for mysterious actions. Emily, meanwhile, stayed home, keeping her distance from everyone. She felt guilt and relief at the same time. She knew that if anyone connected her to Thomas in the wrong way, her life would change. Her family, who had always been protective, might react harshly. She worried about her reputation, her friendships, and what people might think about her character. She wanted to stay invisible until the storm passed. At Thomas's ranch, the silence was heavy. The wind rustled through the fields, and the cattle moved slowly, as if sensing the tension in the air. Thomas sat on the porch, watching the sunset, thinking about what had happened. He didn't regret his decision to help Emily, but he understood the invisible rules of the town. People see what they want to see, and assumptions often outweigh facts. The thought made him uneasy, yet he didn't allow it to stop him from doing what he believed was right. The next day, things began to escalate. A group of men gathered near the general store, speaking in low tones. "I saw Hale at the barn yesterday," one said. Another nodded. "And Emily Carter was there too." Something going on? Their conversation was cautious, but the seed of suspicion had been planted. By the afternoon, the whispers had reached nearly every household. What was most surprising to Thomas was not that people were talking, but how quickly the town had turned on him in their minds. Neighbors who had once waved warmly now offered stiff nods. People crossed the street when he walked by. Even the postman lingered a little longer at the gate, as if questioning whether to deliver letters to someone under suspicion. Emily felt the pressure too. At school and work, she noticed stares and hushed conversations. Some friends avoided her while others asked pointed questions about her day. She had hoped her visit to Thomas would remain unnoticed, but the town's curiosity was relentless. The more she tried to stay quiet, the louder the whispers became. By midweek, Thomas realized that the story was beginning to take on a life of its own. Details were exaggerated, motives were invented, and every retelling added new layers. People speculated about things he hadn't even done. His silence, which he thought would protect both himself and Emily, was now being seen as suspicious. People started to question why he hadn't explained anything. One evening, as Thomas repaired a broken fence post, a neighbor approached. "Thomas," he said cautiously, "people are talking. Maybe you should, explain." Thomas shook his head gently. "Explaining won't help. People will believe what they want to believe." "I can't control that." The neighbor frowned, unsure whether to respect Thomas's decision or push further. Eventually, he nodded and walked away, leaving Thomas alone with the setting sun and his thoughts. The tension reached its peak when a small town meeting was called. At first, it seemed routine, discussion about the upcoming county fair, but soon the conversation turned. Someone brought up Thomas and Emily, and whispers filled the room. People spoke over one another, opinions clashing in a whirlwind of speculation. Some defended Thomas, insisting he was a man of integrity who had done nothing wrong. Others suggested that something unusual had occurred and demanded answers. Thomas listened from his place at the back. He felt the familiar weight of judgment pressing down, not because he had done wrong, but because appearances were being trusted over truth. He realized that revealing the whole story might protect him, but it could also harm Emily. The thought made him hesitate. Protecting others had always been more important than protecting himself. That night, Thomas sat outside again, the sky clear and vast above him. The stars seemed to shine brighter than ever, yet their light offered no comfort. He thought about the way people had rushed to conclusions, how quickly stories became rumors, and how dangerous assumptions could be. He knew that Emily was safe now, but the town's perception of him was shifting in ways he could not control. Emily, in her own home, stared out the window at the darkened streets. She felt the weight of everyone's eyes, even though no one was actually watching. She wondered if she had made a mistake coming to Thomas, but deep down, she knew she had done the right thing. He had helped her when she needed it most, and in a town where judgment was swift and unforgiving, finding someone trustworthy was rare. The following days were a mix of quiet glances, whispered conversations, and small acts of avoidance. Thomas continued his work on the ranch, fixing fences, feeding animals, and maintaining the property. Each time he went into town, he felt the invisible scrutiny. People avoided him or whispered just loud enough for him to hear. The town seemed to pulse with curiosity, every corner hiding speculation. Some people began to question the validity of the rumors. A few close friends of Thomas wondered if the story was being misunderstood. They observed the rancher carefully, noting his routine, his honesty, and his unchanged demeanor. Slowly, a few voices began to speak out in his defense, reminding others that Thomas Hale had always been trustworthy. Still, the majority remained caught up in the excitement of mystery. The barn, the late afternoon, Emily Carter, these details became symbols in the town's imagination. Every retelling added a little more drama. It was no longer about what had happened, it was about what could have happened. And in small towns, that made all the difference. Despite the growing tension, Thomas remained patient. He didn't engage in arguments or try to prove his innocence. He understood that time and action would reveal the truth in their own way. Meanwhile, Emily began to regain some normalcy, cautiously re-entering her daily routine. She was careful to avoid Thomas in public, knowing that any visible interaction would feed the rumor mill. As the week wore on, the town began to realize that stories without evidence were fragile. The whispers started to mix with doubts. People began to ask questions, hesitating before accepting assumptions. Some wondered if they had judged too quickly, while others remained firmly convinced they had seen the truth. Through it all, Thomas kept his focus on the ranch. He repaired fences, checked on the livestock, and ensured the property remained orderly. He avoided confrontations, knowing that the town's curiosity was temporary and that patience would be his strongest ally. Slowly, he began to see a shift, not in everyone, but in enough people to sense that the tide might turn. Emily, reflecting on the week, realized how easily rumors could spread and how quickly trust could be tested. She admired Thomas not just for helping her, but for enduring the town's judgment without complaint. His quiet strength, his integrity, and his patience were remarkable, and she felt gratitude deeper than she could express. By the end of part 2, the town was caught in a delicate balance between rumor and truth. Whispers had spread, assumptions had been made, and reputations had been questioned. Yet, amidst all the speculation, the foundations of trust, courage, and personal integrity had begun to show themselves. Thomas had chosen right over easy, privacy over public approval, and compassion over convenience. The story was far from over. The town's curiosity was far from satisfied. And the choices Thomas had made that quiet afternoon would soon set the stage for events that none of Willow Creek could have predicted. The tension in Willow Creek continued to grow. Even as Thomas Hale went about his daily work, the town seemed to watch him with sharper eyes. Every movement, every decision, every trip into town was noticed and analyzed. People whispered in corners, and some even paused their work just to glance toward the Hale Ranch from a distance. The moment in the barn, brief as it had been, had transformed into a story bigger than anyone could have imagined, and no one was sure what to believe anymore. Thomas himself remained quiet. He spent his mornings tending to the cattle, repairing fences, and checking every inch of his property. The ranch demanded attention, and he welcomed the routine. Yet, every time he walked into town or crossed paths with a neighbor, he felt the invisible weight of judgment. He knew that silence could be misunderstood, and yet he refused to chase rumors or explain himself. Doing so could make the situation worse, and he had no desire to humiliate anyone, especially Emily. Emily Carter, on the other hand, was struggling. Though she had avoided public contact with Thomas as much as possible, she could still feel the eyes of the town on her. Friends she had known for years treated her differently. Conversations stopped when she approached. People whispered just loud enough for her to hear, and she quickly learned which neighbors were sympathetic and which were not. She felt trapped between gratitude toward Thomas and fear of how the town would judge her. One afternoon, the tension reached a new peak. A small group of townspeople gathered near the edge of the general store, speaking in hushed, urgent tones. Someone had claimed they saw Thomas and Emily together again, late in the evening near the barn. The story, already exaggerated, now included imagined actions and motives. By the time the rumor reached other ears, it had transformed into something sensational and scandalous. Thomas knew about the gathering whispers, though he wasn't sure of the details. He continued his work as usual, repairing a gate near the pasture when he noticed a pair of neighbors watching him from a distance. They quickly looked away when he caught their gaze. Thomas simply nodded, acknowledging them without engaging. He understood the nature of curiosity and suspicion. It could not be ignored, but it also could not control him. Meanwhile, Emily's anxiety grew. She confided in a close friend, explaining what had really happened that afternoon in the barn. Her friend listened carefully and promised to keep the secret. But even with trust, Emily felt the pressure of the town's eyes. Every step she took, every word she spoke, felt scrutinized. She feared the next misunderstanding might escalate beyond her control. The situation came to a head one evening when the town held a meeting at the community hall. The agenda was supposed to cover routine topics like the upcoming fair, repairs to the school, and road maintenance. But inevitably, someone mentioned Thomas Hale and Emily Carter. Murmurs rippled through the room. People spoke over one another, speculation growing louder with each comment. "I saw them together near the barn again," one man exclaimed. "Something is going on and we deserve to know the truth." "That's ridiculous," another voice shouted. "Thomas Hale has been a good man all his life. Why would he do anything wrong?" Arguments erupted, and the small hall grew tense with emotion. Some people demanded explanations. Others tried to defend Thomas, insisting that rumors should not dictate judgment. The meeting, meant to be a simple gathering, turned into a heated debate about trust, gossip, and morality. Outside, Thomas stood silently near the entrance, listening to the echoes of voices and whispers. He realized that the town's curiosity was relentless. Some would not stop until they had the story, and some would never stop believing what they imagined. He faced a choice: speak up and reveal the truth, risking Emily's privacy, or remain silent and endure the town's growing suspicion. At the same time, Emily watched from a distance, trembling. She felt torn between fear and hope. Fear that the town would never understand, and hope that Thomas's integrity would eventually speak for itself. She knew he had acted to protect her, and yet the consequences of that decision were now larger than either of them could have anticipated. In the days that followed, the whispers became more persistent. People questioned why Thomas had not explained himself, why Emily had been seen on his property, and what the true story might be. The barn, once an ordinary structure, had become the center of speculation, its walls echoing with imagined secrets. Every glance, every gesture, every word was scrutinized, twisted, and shared. Some townspeople began to take sides. A few respected Thomas and defended him quietly, emphasizing his honesty and his years of service to the community. Others were convinced that something unusual had happened and pressured Emily to explain. She remained cautious, unwilling to betray the trust Thomas had shown her. The emotional weight of the situation began to take a toll on both Thomas and Emily. Thomas, used to solitude and hard work, now felt the strain of constant observation and rumor. Emily, normally confident and composed, found herself anxious and fearful. Both understood that the town's judgment was powerful, and both realized that misunderstandings could have consequences far beyond what anyone imagined. One evening, Thomas returned from the fields to find Emily standing near the edge of his property, her eyes filled with worry. "They're asking questions," she said softly. "Some of them are convinced something happened." Thomas nodded, understanding her fear. "They'll believe what they want," he said calmly. "We can't control their thoughts, we can only control our actions." Emily looked at him, relief and gratitude mixing with her anxiety. "I know you did the right thing," she said, "but I'm afraid the town will never see it that way." Thomas placed a hand on the fence post, staring out across the fields. "Some people will never understand," he said, "but that doesn't mean we made a mistake. What matters is that we acted with honesty and compassion." The following days were filled with subtle tension. People in town continued to speculate, but slowly, a few began to question the validity of their assumptions. They observed Thomas carefully, noting his consistent behavior, his routine, and the fact that nothing he did suggested wrongdoing. Some began to defend him, reminding others of his integrity and years of service. Yet the majority of the town remained caught in the excitement of mystery. Rumors continued to grow, and the barn remained a symbol of secrecy in everyone's mind. Every glance toward the Hale property was accompanied by a story in their imagination. Every movement, every interaction between Thomas and Emily became fodder for speculation. Despite this, Thomas remained steady. He continued his work, tending to the ranch and caring for the animals. He avoided confrontations and refused to engage in arguments about the rumors. His patience, discipline, and focus on doing what was right quietly began to influence a few townspeople, even as others clung to their assumptions. Emily, meanwhile, found small moments of relief. She reconnected with a few friends who believed her story and provided support. She stayed out of the public eye as much as possible, careful not to give anyone the opportunity to twist her actions into another rumor. The tension reached its peak one afternoon when a group of townspeople approached the Hale Ranch under the pretense of checking on repairs to a nearby road. They lingered near the barn, pretending to discuss construction, but clearly observing Thomas and Emily. The moment was uncomfortable and tense. Thomas greeted them politely but did not offer explanations. Emily stayed inside the house, hoping to avoid unnecessary attention. The standoff ended without confrontation, but it left a clear message. Curiosity and suspicion were at an all-time high. The town wanted answers, and the absence of answers only fueled their imagination. Thomas and Emily knew that eventually the truth would need to be revealed, but the timing had to be careful, or someone could be hurt. Late that evening, Thomas sat on the porch, the sun setting in brilliant shades of orange and red. He reflected on the week, the town's reactions, and the delicate balance between privacy and community judgment. He understood the power of perception, the fragility of trust, and the importance of integrity. Emily joined him quietly, sitting a few feet away. "Do you think they'll ever understand?" she asked softly. Thomas shook his head slightly. Some will, some won't, but that doesn't matter. We acted rightly, and that's what counts. She nodded, comforted by his words, yet aware of the challenges that still lay ahead. The whispers had not ended, and the town's curiosity had not faded. But a subtle shift was beginning. Some townspeople were now questioning what they had believed, noticing inconsistencies in the stories, and realizing that appearances could be deceiving. By the end of Part 3, the tension in Willow Creek had reached its emotional peak. Rumors were spreading, assumptions were being challenged, and the truth remained hidden behind walls of fear and privacy. Thomas had endured the judgment without compromising his values. Emily had survived the scrutiny while protecting her dignity. And the town, though caught in a whirlwind of speculation, was on the brink of discovering a truth far more human and compassionate than anyone could have imagined. The stage was set for revelations that would challenge the town's assumptions, redefine relationships, and ultimately reveal the courage, integrity, and humanity of those involved. The morning air in Willow Creek carried a sense of quiet anticipation, though no one could explain why. Even the birds seemed to chirp more softly, and the wind that rustled through the tall grass felt slower, more deliberate. For Thomas Hale, another day on the ranch began like any other, with the routine of feeding cattle, checking fences, and tending to the land. Yet he knew that the tension in town had not disappeared. Rumors had grown louder, and whispers had become a constant hum in the background of everyone's daily life. Emily Carter was also awake early, quietly going about her morning chores at home. The past week had been exhausting. She felt the weight of the town's curiosity pressing on her from every direction. Even though she knew she had done nothing wrong, and Thomas had acted with kindness and discretion, she could not escape the feeling that people were judging her unfairly. The pressure of expectation, the fear of gossip, and the worry for Thomas had all been heavy on her heart. Thomas, noticing her hesitation when they briefly crossed paths that morning, understood. He had seen the same tension reflected in his own reflection in the barn windows. He knew that the town's judgment, once set in motion, could take on a life of its own. And he also knew that the truth, when it finally came out, would have to be handled carefully. By mid-morning, a few townspeople gathered near the edge of town. They spoke in quieter tones than usual, and there was a different energy in their conversation. A handful of people who had been skeptical about the rumors began to notice inconsistencies in what they had heard. Details didn't add up. Stories didn't match observations. Slowly, the first seeds of doubt were planted. Not everyone was ready to believe the truth yet, but enough people were beginning to question the stories that had dominated their minds for the past week. That afternoon, Thomas decided to take a walk through his fields. The sun was high, casting golden light across the ranch. As he moved along the fence lines, checking the cattle and repairing a small broken gate, he noticed a few familiar neighbors watching from a distance. Instead of feeling the usual tension, Thomas felt a quiet resolve. The rumors had been persistent, but the truth had its own strength. It was only a matter of time before it emerged. Emily, feeling a mix of anxiety and hope, decided to take a risk. She visited the diner where she usually kept to herself. She quietly approached a table where a small group of townspeople sat, people who she believed might listen without judgment. Her voice was soft but firm. "I want to tell you what really happened," she began. "There's been a misunderstanding, and I think it's time the truth comes out." The group listened attentively. Emily recounted her visit to Thomas's barn, explaining why she had gone there and why Thomas had acted as he did. She described the fear she felt, the urgency of her situation, and Thomas's calm, careful guidance. She spoke of the moment when she whispered, "Don't, someone might see," and how Thomas had protected her privacy without compromising her safety. As Emily spoke, the listeners' expressions softened. The story she told did not match the dramatic rumors that had circulated. There were no scandalous actions, no secret schemes, no betrayal. There was only trust, integrity, and compassion, qualities that had been misunderstood in the whirlwind of gossip. Slowly, word of Emily's explanation began to spread. People repeated her words carefully, with the weight of truth replacing the excitement of speculation. Meanwhile, Thomas continued his work on the ranch, unaware of how the truth was beginning to shift the town's perception. A few friends approached him, cautiously at first, then more openly, offering quiet words of support. They reminded him that not everyone had believed the rumors, that there were people in Willow Creek who trusted him and respected his judgment. Thomas accepted their words with a nod, his calm demeanor unchanged. He did not seek praise or recognition. He only sought to continue doing what was right. By evening, the atmosphere in the town had shifted noticeably. Conversations that had been filled with suspicion and judgment now carried a sense of reflection and understanding. People who had been eager to believe the worst were beginning to reconsider. They realized how quickly assumptions had been made and how damaging their whispers could have been. Some felt guilt for having judged too hastily. Others felt relief that no harm had actually occurred. Emily, returning home, felt a lightness she had not experienced in days. The pressure had eased, and she felt gratitude not only for Thomas, but for the few neighbors who had chosen to listen and understand. She knew that the full weight of the town's judgment had not vanished, but she also knew that the foundation of truth was stronger than rumor. Thomas, sitting on his porch that evening, watched the sun dip below the horizon. The sky was painted with brilliant shades of orange, pink, and purple, reflecting the calm after a long storm. He thought about the events of the past week, the whispers, the assumptions, and the fears. And he thought about the quiet courage of the people involved. Emily for trusting him, himself for acting with integrity, and the few townspeople who had chosen to seek understanding rather than scandal. That night, as the town grew quiet, a sense of peace settled over Willow Creek. The barn was no longer a symbol of mystery or suspicion. It had become a symbol of trust, courage, and humanity. People who had been eager to judge learned an important lesson: that appearances could be deceiving, that assumptions were dangerous, and that understanding required patience and empathy. In the days that followed, life slowly returned to normal. Thomas continued his routine on the ranch, tending to the animals, repairing fences, and maintaining his property. Emily resumed her daily activities with a renewed sense of confidence. The town, though still curious at times, had begun to appreciate the importance of trust, discretion, and compassion. The story of that afternoon in the barn became a quiet legend in Willow Creek, not a tale of scandal, but a story of human kindness and integrity. People remembered it not for gossip, but for the lessons it taught: the value of protecting others, the strength of quiet courage, and the importance of judging fairly and carefully. For Thomas, the experience reinforced a lifelong principle: that doing the right thing is more important than seeking approval, and that true character is revealed not in public praise, but in private actions. For Emily, it was a lesson in trust, resilience, and the power of being helped when it mattered most. And for the town of Willow Creek, it was a reminder that assumptions can be dangerous, and understanding requires patience, listening, and empathy. In the end, the barn remained standing, unchanged except for the faint marks of human footsteps and the echoes of whispered words. It had witnessed a moment that could have been misinterpreted, a moment that tested the characters of those involved, and a moment that ultimately revealed the true nature of courage, compassion, and integrity. As the stars filled the night sky, Thomas sat quietly on the porch, reflecting on the past events. He thought about the people he had helped, the challenges he had faced, and the town that had once questioned him. And he knew, deep in his heart, that the story of that day, though it had caused tension and worry, had ended with a truth far more powerful than any rumor could have been. Willow Creek had learned an important lesson: that kindness and honesty, even when misunderstood, have the power to change hearts, calm fears, and restore faith in the goodness of people. And Thomas Hale, the quiet rancher who had acted without hesitation to protect someone in need, had shown the town exactly what it meant to act with integrity. By the time the town returned to its usual rhythm, the echoes of the past week had softened. People spoke more carefully, judged more thoughtfully, and appreciated the value of patience. And though the barn remained just a barn, it stood as a silent witness to the courage, trust, and humanity that had quietly transformed a small town forever. The story ended not with drama, but with understanding, not with judgment, but with compassion. And in that understanding, both Thomas Hale and Emily Carter, and the town itself, found peace, closure, and a deeper sense of what it truly meant to act rightly, even when no one was watching.